Okay. Good evening. My name is Shelley Young. I am the very proud employee of the South Norwalk Branch Library, also known as the SoNo Branch Library, where I have had pleasure of working with Norwalk Public Library's Assistant Director, Sherelle Harris, for many years. I would like to welcome all of you this evening to the Norwalk Public Library's One Book, One Community discussion of James Baldwin's book, The Fire Next Time. We have a wonderful panel lined up for a very lively and necessary discussion. But first, I would like to introduce you to Karen Thorson.
Do you want me to talk?
Hold on, Karen.
Okay.
Karen Thorson, with her husband, Doug Dempsey, founded the James Baldwin Project, and we happily collaborate with them and appreciate their love enough for Mr. Baldwin to preserve his legacy. You can see Karen's bio on the screen. I will give you a few seconds to read her bio, and then I will turn it over to her to tell us a bit about the James Baldwin Project. And to introduce the clip you are about to see, I will give everyone a few seconds to read her bio.
Hi.
Okay. Karen, you're on.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I don't know how much you were able to absorb by reading a bio. I'm not too good at reading on screen when I'm thinking about a lot of stuff, but basically I had the privilege of working with James Baldwin when he was alive back in the late 80s.
Essentially high-fiving white nationalist and ultra-nationalist groups and
I hear
encouraging them to stand back and stand by. Why are these people still defending him?
should I keep talking?
Hold on a second.
Anyway, I made this film with James Baldwin. We were working on a film together, and then he got sick and died back in 1987. So 30 years ago, I suddenly turned around and no longer had my collaborator and realized that we very much needed to know more about James Baldwin. He's been someone I've admired since my college days. Can everybody hear me? I don't know. There's somebody has a radio on or TV on somewhere. It's okay? Anyway, I made this film, and you're about to see a 5-minute clip that basically will introduce you to a little bit of James Baldwin as he was when he was alive, and it'll start mainly with his love of books. Books were his best friend, and I can't imagine anything more appropriate than this event hosted by the Norwalk Public Library, which is actually where I grew up. So I'm very, very happy to be here with you, and I'll let Jimmy do the talking. While you're waiting, I'll also say Dr. Maya Angelou, one of his closest friends, is also part of this. She reads from The Fire Next Time.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. And Karen has a video I want to share with everybody.
You're good. Yeah.
You think your pain and your heartbreak
I'm sorry.
are unprecedented in the history of the world. But then you read. It was books that taught me. The things that tormented me the most were the very things that connected me with all the people who were alive or who had ever been alive.
It's
I went to 103 or 4 times a week. And I read everything there. I mean, every single book in that library. I knew that what was happening in those books was also happening all around me. And I was trying to make a connection between the books and the life I saw and the life I lived. I knew I was black, of course, but I also knew I was smart. I didn't know how I would use my mind, or even if I could. But that was the only thing I had to use. And I was going to get whatever I wanted that way. So I watched school where I watched the streets, because part of the answer was there.
He's not even teaching me about the future of my people. What you going to school for then, dummy? We don't even have a country. I know that. Do we have a country? You say the United States is your country, which is not your country. You have no flag, brother.
A boy last week, he was 16, told me on television. Thank God we got him to talk. Maybe somebody will start to listen. He said, I got no country, I've got no flag. Now, he's only 16 years old. And I couldn't say you do.
Yes.
I don't have any evidence to prove that he does.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me,
Love has
sir?
never been a popular movement. And no one's ever wanted really to be
Yes, sir.
free.
Can you hear me?
The world is held together, really it is held together by the love and the passion of very few people.
Everything now, we must assume, is in our hands. If we, and now I mean the relatively conscious whites and the relatively conscious blacks, if we do not falter in our duty now, we may be able to end the racial nightmare and change the history of the world. If we do not dare everything, the fulfillment of that prophecy, recreated from the Bible in songs by former slaves, is upon us. God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, fire next time.
It is not a romantic matter. It is the unutterable truth. All men are brothers. That's the bottom line. If you can't take it from there, you can't take it at all. A day will come when you will trust you more than you do now. When you trust me more than you do now. We can trust each other. I do believe that we can all become better than we are. I know they can.
Yes, thank you so much for the video. Now we are ready to begin the discussion of James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. I'm happy to introduce the panel. Brendan L. McGee, Jr. is a fourth-term Hoffer-Windsor State Representative, Chair of the Legislature's Public Housing Committee, and Chair of the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus. Next, we have Dr. Alexandra Estrella, the esteemed Superintendent of Norwalk Public Schools. We have Jaylene Seed, a lifelong Norwalk resident who is a married father of one and a dedicated community activist. We have the Reverend Elizabeth Abel, who also known as Pastor Liz. Pastor Liz has a master's in social work from Columbia University, and she pastors Cornerstone Community Church, a United Methodist church here in Norwalk. We also have Elijah Manning, a Norwalk husband and father of two, who is dedicated to bringing change to our school curricula. And finally, last but never least, we have Farah Moran, a Norwalk native who also has a Master of Social Work degree from Columbia University. Farah is dedicated to anti-racist and community healing and education. We have a wonderful group for you to hear tonight. And now I would like to introduce the hostess for this evening, Sherelle Harris. Sherelle has been with the Norwalk Public Library for 21 years. She started as a part-time young adult librarian, was later hired to lead the South Norwalk Branch Library's Children Department, and is now the Assistant Director of the Norwalk Public Library. We all know Sherelle is very dedicated and hardworking. She also respects every culture very well and thinks that she can learn a lot from each of them.
Hi, Shirley. Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Shirley, so much for the great introductions and for being a phenomenal employee. As Shirley said, I'm Sherelle Harris. I'm the Assistant Director of the Norwalk Public Library. So I just want to welcome everybody and thank you so much for attending. So we began with 6 moderators who then pulled me in from behind the scenes, wanting me to be a little bit more involved. So now I'm the hostess and we have 7 panelists, including Karen Thornson, founder of the James Baldwin Project, who enthusiastically lent her support. So thank you, Karen, and thank you so much to all the moderators for lending their time. So before we get started, I'd like to give a few housekeeping details. We have 7 topics that we will discuss. Panelists will give their opinions, and then you, the audience, can type in your questions or comments or rebuttals in the chat box. List your first and last name if you want it read, and you can address a specific panelist, or you know, your question can just be in general. So that said, we will get started. So to our esteemed panelists, can you all let us know what your favorite passage or theme was in the book? And is everybody unmuted, Shelley?
Yes.
Anybody want to begin, or should I pick someone?
I'll start. So, hi everybody. Thanks for everybody joining. One of my favorite passages in the book was when James was talking about when he got to meet the female preacher, and she asked him, "Whose little boy are you?" And I really like that because I think a lot of young people kind of could relate to that, especially myself. When you kind of, and he said, I think going in, he said he eagerly wanted to be somebody's little boy. And I think that it's 2 parts. You have like the world that you have people that want to claim you as theirs, whether church or some people alternative than the church on the streets, or and then also as a kid you want to be accepted and you want to be a part of something. And I think that's an important moment in all of our lives, where we kind of could decide the trajectory of our lives. Because if we choose the right paths of whose we are, then we're fortunate and we could change things around. But if we choose the wrong, like he put in like the pimps or the whores, then it'd be a different type of life that we could have. So that was one of my favorite passages.
Thank you so much, Jalen.
I'd love to jump in. As we all know, and this is Brandon McGee here, we all know that The Fire Next Time is composed of two essays. You know, the first essay, The Dungeon Shook, the letter to his nephew, we know that, and then Down at the Cross, where obviously it talks a little bit about religion and it goes deep. But I really, this was a heavy book. Let me just put it that way. But the first letter to his nephew was very interesting. And I couldn't even get beyond the first 20 pages without having to go back and really sit and reflect. And on page 7, it talks about how you were born where you were born and faced the future that you faced because you were Black and for no other reason. And I think about James Baldwin and how direct and in touch with who he was. I struggle with this idea of James having an internal fight and contradicting himself between his reality and this idea of loving the white culture or the white man, as he frequently describes them. And so there was a theme, you know, talking about we gotta love. We know that, you know, white folks sometimes don't even understand what they don't understand, but we gotta love. And I just felt like, as my mom would say, you talking out of both sides of your face here. I understood exactly what he was saying. And for someone who struggled with Christianity, he really took on the pillars of loving thy neighbor. So it was a very interesting thing to me, and it stuck out a lot.
I think a line to that, the quote in his text that states, love takes off the mask that we fear we cannot live without and know we cannot live within. I use the word love here, not merely in the personal sense, but as a state of being or a state of grace, not in the infantile American sense of being made happy, but in the tough and universal sense of quest and daring and growth. And I think that quote kind of aligns to some of the elements to the letter of to his nephew, but also his deeper sense of utilizing the concept of love to combat some of the struggles around racial inequities and prejudice that existed during his time, and a lot of the things that we are faced and confronting with today, with a lot of the conversations we're currently having as a nation, and some of the battles that we as the current generation and the generation that is growing to become is facing, and having to think and redefine how do we use the concept of love to battle some of the inequities and fears that we have as human beings.
Good point, Dr. Estrella.
I'm going to jump in right there. Hi, everyone. I'm Pastor Liz, pastor of Cornerstone Community Church. And actually, to all of those points, for me, the part that stands out the most is where we're going to end this conversation on page 105 in the quote where it says, everything now we must assume is in our hands, and we have no right to assume otherwise. I am a third career pastor. This is my third career. So in that quest of searching for purpose and definition and where my voice is going to be heard to serve the greatest good is why this stands out the most for me, because each one of us on this call and this conversation has a role and a stance to take in this, and it's up to each one of us as to what it's going to be. We don't have a right not to assume that we don't matter. Each one of us do.
Great, great, great.
Thank you, Pastor Liz. I'll jump in. So I wouldn't say this is my favorite theme of the book, but one that stood out to me was the theme of death in the book. One of the passages Baldwin says is, life is tragic simply because the earth turns and the sun inexorably rises and sets, and one day for each of us, the sun will go down for the last time. Perhaps the root of our trouble, the human trouble, is that we will all sacrifice the beauty of our lives. We'll imprison ourselves in totems, taboos, crosses, blood sacrifices, steeples, mosques, races, armies, flags, nations, in order to deny the fact of death, the only fact we have. It seems to me that one ought to rejoice in the fact of death, ought to decide indeed to earn one's death by confronting the passion with the conundrum of life. And that really stood out to me because of how death is the one thing that all humans have in common, and we all know it to be true and we all experience it. And it also stands out to me because of how folks of color rejoice in death rather than only mourn. We have celebrations of life rather than funerals. We have going home services instead of wakes. We have fiestas instead of mourning, and folks of color often continue to honor death by honoring their ancestors. So I thought that Baldwin really spoke to the commonality we all share in the human experience.
Thank you so much, Farah. And
for me, I'm Elijah.
Hi, Elijah.
Jarrell. So for me, one of the things that stood out most was similar to what Jalen was touching on, is about finding your place in this world, but specifically, he mentioned several times about learning from your past to help that dictate where you're going for your future. And it's not just a cry for Black people to acknowledge that as well, but he puts it on everybody. One thing he says, well, it's actually mentioned right away in the first short essay, where they say they've had to believe for many years and for innumerable reasons that Black men are inferior to white men. Many of them indeed know better, but as you will discover, people find it very difficult to act on what they know. To act is to be committed, and to be committed is to be in danger. In this case, the danger in the minds of most white Americans is the loss of their identity. So that that alone makes me acknowledge my identity, and because I am mixed, I am half Black and half white, and acknowledging both sides of myself, and learning about who I am, where I come from, and how I fit in to acknowledging both sides of myself and how I may be looked at by other people. So that is why history resonated with me as to where we can go as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Thank you, Elijah. Thank you so much. Anybody else have anything to add? Audience, if you have any questions, you can use, or if you have any.
I can jump in here if it's okay. I just wanted to say that I really love the fact that he explores, he actually dissects a number of religions, his own experience and that of the Black Muslims, and he goes into Malcolm X, and he explores, we don't practice what we preach, and yet he tells us what we could practice, which is basically love. He asks the question, isn't love more important than color? And in my book, he said, I left the church, but the church never left me. And in a sense, this is his religion. It is about love. And the fact that he also said all of mankind is, most of mankind is not all of mankind, basically giving us hope that some of us are actually able to acknowledge what is going on. And as he says in the opening essay, know whence you came. Once you do that, you start to explore your own identity, and then you can help yourself identify with others and understand what we share, which is a common humanity.
Very, very well put. And you have a unique perspective because you actually knew him.
I did. I really feel like a conduit. I feel as if what he had to say was so important. I'm grateful that I'm able to pass some of it on.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, with you two being different races, that you shared something very beautiful. Something very beautiful.
Well, he practiced what he preached. He was able to embrace someone. I mean, we couldn't be farther apart in so many ways, and yet we couldn't be closer together. And that is because he had such a wide understanding. And that's what he's asking of us, anyone on this call and anyone in the world today, to try and first acknowledge what we've left out of our history, and secondly, to acknowledge what we share, what we have in common.
Awesome. I don't see any.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry. Hold on one second.
Okay, so anybody who wants to comment, can you go into the chat rooms?
Oh, okay.
If that's okay. But you know what, you're on now, so go ahead. But anybody else, if you want to comment, we're using the chat box.
Okay. I just had I'm a lover of James Baldwin, but there's something that he said, and I wanted.
And hi, Sharon. Anyway, how are you? I'm very well. How are you?
I was working, and then I finally got on.
That's okay. You're here. You're here.
He made a statement that says, in order for African Americans to be free, that white Americans have to be free. I think that is so profound in that statement that he said that, because I don't know, I could be wrong, because my take on it is, I think sometimes, when it comes to black and white, now I'm from another country. I'm from a country that is black. I met the first white person like at a, we call them like the markets. I'm from Jamaica. 46 years ago, I've been in America since I was a little girl. But I never, ever knew prejudice. Yes, you got a light-skinned person and a dark-skinned person, or your hair is different or whatever. That's the prejudice I knew. And I came here back in the 70s. My mother's been here since 60s and 50s. And so for me, it was kind of weird being, the history of America, I didn't know it. What we were taught in my country was different. The history of America, I didn't really know hardcore, slavery and all that stuff, because it wasn't taught to us back then. So when I got here and I got to schoolings and I got, whatever, I got educated and everything. And then I started realizing, wow, like, I'm Black, it was like, you're a black girl, where I was just Sharon. And all of a sudden, I'm a black girl. And so that's when I started finding out about prejudice. But I think with that statement, and this is just my view, that I think the guilt that carries over from ancestor to generations on the white side of the fence, you know, where they're saying that, I think the animosity, that's why I think he stresses love so much, is because there's a lot of hatred, but there's hatred on both sides. And I could be wrong, because let's face it, you know, things were done to African Americans by Caucasians, and so therefore that's held. The heart is holding that. There's no freedom. And I think when it comes to religious beliefs, we as Christians are taught to love and to let go, not to forget. You know, a lot of people don't forget, but to love and embrace. And I think whites are still carrying a lot of things that they've done to African Americans, and African Americans in turn is doing the same thing. So in order for us to let go and get, you know, build some kind of, like, come to terms and build some kind of real love and respect for each other, it's going to take a collaboration, and it's going to take a lot of change, because there's systematic stuff that has been going on from generations to generations to generations. And
So
I thought it was a great statement.
Yeah. To your point, so that's actually a great segue into our next topic. Can everyone hear? I can't.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So, so it's interesting, you know, as we were bonding and, you know, just discussing the book, you know, we had some, and you mentioned religion, but we have people who are coming at religion from so many different perspectives. So it's a prevalent theme in the book, and all of the panelists had different views on religion or spirituality. One person said, you know, I don't want to make this a come to Jesus, you know, event, you know, so we just all had, you know, others are very strong, you know, in their religion. So I'm going to segue and have the panelists talk about their views, and if they think religion, you know, is the same or it differs today, you know, from the time in which the book was written, and just what their take on the whole religious spirituality thing is. And again, if anyone has any, you know, if you want to comment, if you can use our chat box, and we, you know, we'll read your comments, and, you know, the panelists, you know, can answer your questions. If it's just, you know, a general statement, if you want to state your name, that's great. So, so there's Greg Burnett. I think Greg Burnett is on. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I just want to acknowledge what he's saying. Greg is one of our Norwalk councilmen, and he says on page 40, James Baldwin states, when we were told to love everybody, I had the thought that that meant everybody. So the question to the panelists is why, I'm assuming this is, why do we have hatred towards each other? And if we can kind of maybe go through that quickly, so we can. Yes, ma'am.
Is it okay if we put that question with our number 3? Because I think it'll answer the question, and we can approach it directly, because that question speaks directly to that conversation that we're going to have for question number 3, if that's okay.
Oh, perfect. No, not, we're all in this together. So yeah. I've gotten outvoted several times. I'm good.
No, just want to know, Council Member Burnett, know that it's very relevant to this conversation, and we are definitely going to get to it.
Perfect. Okay, and I think Representative McGee was going to address the whole religion piece.
I don't know about the whole religion.
We want the whole religion.
Just to so by way of information, my dad's a preacher. I am an elder at my church. My wife's father is a bishop. So I can carry on, right? So I'm just letting you know where who I am and what I'm about, and then what I'm going to say may confuse some of you. Okay, so I'm currently reading another book, and meanwhile we're here in session, and I'm reading bills as well. But I'm reading a book called The Color of Compromise, and I don't know if you all have heard of that book. It is written by Jamar Tisby, and it's the truth about the American church's complicity in racism. And it basically enlightens us on the history, whether we want to ignore it or we just don't know it. But it has equal parts of pain and inspiration, and it talks about how church and Christianity did not support social justice. So then you segue into this idea of James Baldwin struggling with just Christianity, although I don't know if he struggled. I just think he was introduced to some things, and it was hard for him to, I think, come to terms with some of the ugly stains of the church. And I just admire his commitment, though, to the church. So while he left the church, love was still in his heart, and he was still serving as light in dark places. But then I go back to my newfound information around the history within Christianity and how many of the churches basically didn't even want Black folk to be a part of their churches. Yet and still we're talking about love, and we're talking about God, and we're talking, so I could understand some of the struggles this man had during the time. But then when you talk about the racial tensions that we are faced with in America today, this idea of love and really being responsible, because on page 40, thank you, Mr. Counselor, for bringing that up. On page 40, he also talks about just his own responsibility of making sure to love people and not react to the white man who never rose for a Black woman or never respected a Black woman. But as a Black man in politics, seeing the nasty, nasty things that happen on the back end and all of the disproportionate impact on communities of color, you know, I struggle sometimes, if I could be real with you, on this idea of loving this evil system that does not support me. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. I know we're talking about Christianity, and I can't wait till we get to the third question.
The third question.
But anyway, I'll leave it there.
And it's, I think there's several religions that are represented with the audience. So, Christianity, Judaism, there's several different takes. So it'll be interesting to hear, if the audience has anything to say. So,
and that was from a Christian perspective, just to put that out there.
So I see one, happens to be page 37.
Oh, Yvette Gore, one of our school board members, she also is referencing page 37, but I'll let you go ahead and then I'll say.
Well, so mine is segueing right along with that. And
okay.
It goes to the fact that he spoke about mainly three different religions. He spoke about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And each one has a similar foundation, but each one has vast differences in how they present their idea of what to follow. So, he even says to his father, like, he's more of a Christian than you are, even though his best friend was Jewish. And then when he meets Elijah Muhammad, it becomes about how the Christianity has it wrong because they are worshiping a white Jesus, where Islam is worshiping a Black Allah. So the idea then becomes, well, how is each one correct, but how are they wrong if they are all attempting to speak about love and acceptance of one another, but yet each one has such a, I don't know the right word, and I don't want to say distrust of one another, but it seems to be they all clash because nobody has it right, if you will. So his whole perspective was not only was he searching for who he was, but he was searching for how to hold religion as part of something that will help him to not only find the best version of himself, but allow him to inform other people. And there was no set way that he ever seems to have truly discovered, because it's an ongoing exploration as we continue to learn and evolve into what each religion is. So it was fascinating to me. I've never studied Islam or Judaism. I grew up Catholic. So to me, hearing the differences, which I've never dove into before, were wonderful to open my mind in a different way and to think about something that I had not yet taken, I guess, the proper perspective and the proper time to sit there and learn about. You know, I as a Christian was always taught to love thy neighbor, turn the other cheek, and all of that. And, you know, sometimes we hear that other religions are not taught the same thing, but once you study them, they are taught the same thing. They may not have the same Jesus or, you know, whatever figurehead you want to say to share that information, but the message should always, or it seems to be very similar in these religions. And I think as we continue to progress as people, it goes to the same with racial barriers, that we need to find a way to bridge those gaps in religion and understand that following any religion doesn't make you more right than another religion. And what can you learn from that perspective?
Thank you. Right on that, Elijah. As the only pastor here with a master's in divinity, I had to study world religions. And one of the things that I recognize in my studies and in my travel, even the fact that this is not my first career choice, right? I feel like this is something that I got yoked up literally to get into. If there's any pastors out there, some of you really do know what it means like to be walking down a path, but like, no, that's not the path for you. There's a difference between denomination and religion, right? So religion is how you practice who you worship. And a lot of that, for me, I rest on, if you worship a supreme being, I'm good with you. And we could talk about what that means for you. And we can just have a conversation. So even to speak to what Councilman Burnett was saying about this, why do we hate each other? Well, we define people's religion as a part of their identity, or the way they worship, or the way they study who God is, as their definition, their identity, but that's not the whole story. And so all of us as humanity are different. And there is one thing that unites us. The same thing is about, for me, God. And so for me, Jesus is the way. That may not be true for you. I will not tell you, you cannot go get there by whatever way you found out. I want to figure it out, what works for you, because every person is not going to get there the same way. And I feel like that's okay. God created us beautifully differently. And if we can start searching for the things that unite us as compared to the things that separate us or divide us, that's where we find that thread of love, and denounce completely that thread of hatred or those threads that separate us, and really study everybody and everything. Have the question, my denomination, which is United Methodist, which as united as we are on the brink of separation, right? So we can, that's another conversation for another day. But the reality of even that is that I lost my whole train of thought with that whole other conversation.
So united and, separation and.
It's all right. It'll come back.
It'll come back. And
it sure will. And I'm not afraid to jump in when it does.
And we know you're not. So just jump in. Jump in, if you need to.
I think I think part of that too, and like Pastor Liz said about like religion is how we practice. I think that comes down to a lot of about who the person is. Look at somebody like Malcolm X. He wouldn't be called like he wouldn't be like pulled to Christianity. Somebody like Muhammad Ali, they won't be pulled to Christianity. I mean, Muhammad Ali grew up a Christian, but he always asked like, why are we worshiping this white Jesus and all this other stuff? And it kind of took him away. So, and even Baldwin speaks about it, how like kind of the Islam, it was like they didn't believe in the white Jesus, so they created their own like black God type of thing. So I think it also pulls into our personal experiences as people of like what religions we decide to go to. And even if we're like, say we're a Baptist, we might like a certain church because we could relate to the music even more. We could relate to the pastor even more, the style of preaching. So it's also like the person, like what brings us to that religion. And also like even with like Islam, I think a lot of it, like if you listen to Malcolm X, in a lot of his speeches, even like after his separation from the nation, he would talk about how we should love and we shouldn't do violence, but we're not going to let people put their hands on us. And if we look at the context of that situation, a lot of people say Malcolm X was like the masculinity restored in African Americans and black men. And you had like Martin Luther King who was saying like turn the other cheek. And I mean, it sounds great, because we saw the outcome, and Martin Luther King is exalted pretty much as this father of civil rights here. But like with Malcolm X, if you think as a man, somebody like beating you down, how hard it is, and even John Lewis talks about that, how hard it is to not be hit. So if you think about like the consciousness of a black man, to be told like the cops are going to hit you and not to react, or they're gonna like sick dogs on you and put how like not to react. So it also spoke to the consciousness of the person at that time, of how that person was feeling. So I think religion also pulls that way, where what speaks to you.
I found my thought. So and I'm glad Jay came next, because it speaks exactly to that. So we're celebrating this movement called See All the People, and it's the 3-minute story. Like sit down for 3 minutes and just listen to what somebody has to say about how they got to where they are right now. Period.
That was worth waiting for, Pastor Liz. Thank you.
Pastor Liz is always dropping the best little stories. It like inspires me so much. So I wanted to touch a little bit differently on the same topic of religion, but it's I think Baldwin, what he focused a lot on in his writing was the institution of the church, and how it is, or rather was, the pillar of many communities. So I think in both of his experiences with the Nation of Islam, as well as the Christian church that he grew up in and then he went to as a teenager, those institutions were places of sanctuary. Those are places of sanctuary from the outside play in the Black community in both Harlem and other places like Harlem, even I would say in our own hometown. So I think that it being a sanctuary sometimes can lead other people to think that we're largely ignoring other groups and through organized attempts at unity under the guise of this sanctuary being the church. And I think he touched on that, and I noticed that one of the commenters in the chat talked about how his Jewish friend wasn't accepted by his family or his church just because of a different faith. And that goes completely against all of the unity that the churches preached, but didn't really practice. So the question, I think, focuses on what our views are and if we think it's like different from today and from the time it was written. And I do think it is a bit different in a way, because I don't know that church is often the pillar of sanctuary for most folks today. I know that church attendance rates are going down significantly, and I don't think that's like due to lack of anything changing within the church, but I do think it's a perspective that the church isn't out in the streets. And I know folks like Pastor Liz is out in the streets. We've seen her at protests. We know where she is, but I can speak as someone who is actively involved, and I don't see a unified attempt from churches in our community or in the communities that I've served, where they're in the streets with us fighting for the same calls for unity. So I think it's a little bit different, but it's still the same because we still see a lot of the social ills that Baldwin talked about.
Okay. So we have a, go ahead, Jalen.
To touch on that, I think there's kind of like a perception that, especially like say like Black Lives Matter or the young people of this movement, they kind of, it's this perception that they don't like the church or they hate the church and they don't want to be a part of it. But it's not. I think that's false. I talk to a lot of these people, young people my age, and they don't hate the church. They're just looking for the church, and it's kind of like a disappointment. And they might say certain things, but it's not out of hate, and it's not that they don't want them there. It's kind of like, where are you? Like, I wanted you here, and like I expected you to be here, but you're not, type of thing. And that's why I'm happy that we have people like Pastor Liz and other pastors that's willing to come out here and meet the people where they are.
So I just want to segue. I just have to, we're at 8 o'clock. So I just want to give the audience a chance to say some things through me. So Yvette, who's with our Norwalk Public School System, she's one of our chiefs. She spoke to page 37, where James Baldwin talks about his relationship with his friend who's Jewish. And when Mr. Baldwin's father asks if his friend is saved, and he responds, no, he's Jewish, and he wonders if his friend will be tormented. So she said to her, it speaks to a concept that the spirit of love or the spark of the divine exists in the spark of the personal relationships between and among people. So thank you very much for that, Yvette. And then
a second.
Yeah, thank you. And so Joy says, Mr. Baldwin, his quote truly resonated even with her 12-year-old daughter. To accept one's past or one's history is not the same thing as drowning in it. It is learning how to use it. That is so profound. And then Paul Scarborough, he says, what Elijah said is so true. Most of what we know about other religions is filtered through the lens of our own faith traditions, which often distort the reality of traditions other than our own. So those were a few quotes. And you can keep our chat room moving, but I'll segue into, and everyone, I just want you to be cognizant of our time. So our third topic is integration. There's some who fought for Blacks to be integrated into white society. That was Dr. King's initial stance. Others wanted a separatist Black movement and took a Black nationalist stance like Marcus Garvey and initially Malcolm X. Some say Black people were better off during segregation. Others disagree. When Caribbean American singer and activist Harry Belafonte reflects on his friend Dr. Martin Luther King, he said, midway through the civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King realized that the struggle for integration would ultimately become a struggle for economic rights. I remember the last time we were together at my home, shortly before he was murdered. He seemed quite agitated and preoccupied, and I asked him what the problem was. I've come upon something that disturbs me deeply, he said. We fought hard and long for integration, as I believe we should have, and I know that we will win, but I've come to believe we're integrating into a burning house. Mr. Belafonte said he questioned Dr. King, what should we do? And Dr. King replied that we should become the firemen. Let us not stand by and let the house burn. So with that in mind, what does an anti-racist community in America look like in 2020?
None of us has the answer, right? We're all waiting to see who's going to jump into this thing first. And this is the thing, like Dr. King had this dream of the beloved community, right? And creating this place where There are 6 principles, and to name all of them would make me a genius, which I'm not. But it's something that we should all look into so that we can become the beloved community. And it's truly where we see each other for who we are and what we can be as one people. And that's, for me, that's not denying the differences of us, but it's about accepting the differences that make us, so that we can actually come to a place of understanding who each other are. Our lives, our context have given us our identity. And to negate that doesn't allow us to be seen fully. And so it is up for, and this is how kind of I started, like it's up to each one of us to work to learn who the next person is and to befriend them. Like Karen was saying about how her relationship is with Mr. Baldwin, is they have a relationship where love unites them. They are from 2 opposite ends of any spectrum, and yet you can hear from her words, his words, and you can feel the passion. We should be able to speak about that with everybody on this call if we have any kind of relationship. I believe somebody said something in the comment about it's about building relationships. It's about building relationships. For me, that's what Jesus did. He went into the synagogue. I'm not going to preach. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to sit down. Somebody else go.
For me, all right, obviously I am interested in doing a curriculum change. I mean, that is what you heard in my bio. That is something I've been working towards. So to me, the idea of being able to change to a hopefully less racist society starts with the ability to teach it to children. Because Frederick Douglass, one of his quotes, I know I'm going off from James Baldwin for a moment, but Frederick Douglass stated that it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. So the idea becomes, for me, and somebody has just mentioned this in the comments as well, about fear. Okay, so fear, when we separate our histories, and we don't truly look at what achievements and advancements we have all made as people, especially in this nation, because that's what we're talking about, then we are not acknowledging that there have been monumental moves from people of color, from women, from all minorities, from the LGBT community. And when we put them often pigeonholed to be focused on once in a while, it doesn't truly allow us to get a deeper understanding of where these people come from and how they've helped. So I also put it in terms for myself as when people say, I don't see color, is one of those terms that I think comes from a good place, like the idea of it meaning that, they're saying that they don't see you as different. But what that really says is, you don't see all of me, because if you don't see my color, you are missing a portion of who I am as an individual. And you automatically now cannot learn everything about me, because you will not see past what you want to see of me. And that therefore means you will never truly be able to see all of me and learn from all of me. So intentions are different than implementation, and I think we need to find a better way to implement our desire to learn about one another, to talk to one another. And sometimes it's through religion, sometimes it's through just education, sometimes it's just through sitting down and actually having a conversation with somebody that doesn't look like you, doesn't think like you, has never been to the same store you've been to. It could be so many different ideas that belong here, but we don't oftentimes sit and have that conversation.
Okay. I have some comments from the audience, but Dr. Stray, is that you?
That was me.
Go ahead, sweetie.
So there's a quote tied to Elijah's comment that resonates for me from the text, which is, whoever debases others is debasing himself. And I think a lot of times people's ignorance of one another sometimes leads them to have conversations of others in ways that are derogatory, or not really aligned to the meaning of who those people are within a particular society. And I think it's really important that tied to curriculum development, but communities at large, that people focus on not always aligning themselves to their own affinity groups and really thinking about how to embrace others, right? So you think about a school cafeteria and usually you see children aligning to their own affinity groups because that's what's comfortable. And a lot of times that's what they see adults model for them. So thinking about how do we as a community embrace the willingness to learn from one another, and then tying it to what we do in schools. Who do we honor? Who do we celebrate? Who do we see as kings and queens as we embark in novels and texts and conversation about historical context? Because a lot of times, even in present times, when we talk about people of color, we talk about them in the concepts of they being suppressed rather than talking about them in the context of their highest moments. And tied to what Elijah was talking about curricula, a lot of work has to be done in terms of how do we represent others within history and not necessarily tie them to the colonialist mindset that I think a lot of our curriculum is targeting towards. And then utilizing that also in thinking about how do we as a society think about our own practices and beliefs, because schools usually resonate what's happening in society, and utilizing those pieces to really reflect on how we as the community have to rethink how we communicate and talk about ourselves as human beings, period.
Thank you so much.
I would like to add something that James Baldwin said about reaching out to difference, which I think is, if we only stick with our own affinity groups, we miss this. And he said there's, not only is it a way to understand your identity and what you share with others, but also, and this is a quote of his, not in the fire next time, but a really important one: if you can change, even by a millimeter, the way someone sees the world, then you can change the world. It's one at a time, and we don't want to take forever, but just reaching out to one person and talking about the way they see things. The comments that I'm reading here in the chat are expanding my mind as we speak.
Yeah, I think that's important, but I think like before you even can have a conversation, a true honest conversation with people, both parties need to feel that they're going to be understood and that they are understood. So I think, and a lot of times we tiptoe around the subject of race and the plight of African Americans, and I think that we can't, because I mean, even you talk about like kids sitting at the lunch table with kids that look like them, they do that because they like Dr. Shell said, because they feel comfortable, because they know they're not going to be judged, because they know they could talk about similar things, TV shows they watch, problems that they're having, and they can relate. And African Americans, a lot of times, like, and a lot of people have a issue with, they say like African Americans are being too forgiving too often, but you have a group of people who feel like they aren't being heard a lot of the time. And they feel like people don't understand their plight and everything that's going on in their lives. And like, we read this book, and it's heartbreaking because it was like published in 1963, but in 2020, we're still fighting for Breonna Taylor. We're still dealing with a lot of the same issues, and maybe we don't see drug dealers on the street, but we know that African Americans are being disproportionately incarcerated. We have these issues, so we have that, but I think we have to also be really honest with ourselves that it's hard for many African Americans to have this conversation because they feel like it's going to be kind of, okay, well, love everybody and we got to get to know each other. And they feel like they're not going to be understood. So I kind of don't want to be the person to say we can't do that, but I think we also have to be truly honest with each other about what's going on. And we can't tiptoe around the conversation just because it's hard. I think we have to hit it right on the nose and know that like racism is still alive, and that we still have a lot of issues in pretty much every sector of the society that African Americans are facing. And that's why you have this explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement, not the organization, but the movement of people that saying enough, and they just want to be heard. And you have a person that feels like they're not heard, you aren't going to have any productivity until you make that person feel that you hear what they said, and not just hear, but you understand, and you're going to work to try to make it better for them.
Great point, Jalen. And I'm going to give the audience a chance to speak. Janie Williams, who's one of our library board members, said, "Thank you, Jalen, very well said." And Brandon McGee, oh, I'm sorry, Brandon, your quote just went away.
Yeah, no, I was responding to Godfrey asking the author of the Color of Compromise. But Jalen, if I may, Jalen, you just said something that I was thinking about and hesitant and wondering whether or not I should say anything, because I didn't want to be, not that I'm saying you are a Debbie Downer on this love fest that we're having in regards to race relations in this country. And there's no way, okay, you're going to tell me to talk about love, which I'm all for it, but you don't see me, you don't invest in my community, my education is not top notch, and the list goes on. And so I struggle, among many, with this idea of being the individual or the culture or Black folk, just, I don't see anything, but I love you. Keep beating me down, but I love you. It's something to be said, and we have to continue working on it. I'm not saying that we shouldn't build relationships, because we should. Some of my long-lasting relationships that I've had since school, I was bussed out to a white school district. I still remain great friends with my white friends, but it still doesn't speak to the lack of investment in the community that I live in. So talk to me about that. Like, let's have that conversation. And on page 22, and I'm not going to read it, but if you all want to just go and take a look at it, James talks about white people in this country having quite enough to do in learning how to accept and love themselves and each other. And goes all the way on and talking about a bunch of other stuff. But I just think it's important that we not tiptoe, using your words, Jalen, around the elephant in the room.
I want to add to that real quick, because
I just need everybody to be cognizant of time, and we still have like quite a few, so we can continue this conversation, and we can just choose one of the 4 topics that we have left. So that's it. Go ahead, sweetheart.
All right. All I wanted to say was we also had the school integration that was supposed to possibly happen, and we had the vote on it, and it was voted against. And that was a way that we were going to redistrict and put schools that were not as funded together with schools that were more funded, and that was voted down. And I mean, seeds of racism, quite possibly, systemically, because we didn't want to be invested in those same communities. So that is something that we have to be cognizant of.
Okay. Okay, so we'll hear just a little bit. I don't want the audience to feel ignored. So let's see, Diana Carpio, who's one of my fellow school board members, she quotes from the book, "Please try to remember that what they believe as well as what they do and cause you to endure does not testify to your inferiority, but to their inhumanity and to their fear." So she has a question, and I'll ask each of you who wants to respond, if you can keep it to 30 seconds or less. She says, how do you relate this quote to society now?
I think that it's the reason why Black Lives Matter was born, especially, and again, the statement that just Black Lives Matter. And I think that it's a response to all of the things that's been happening to African Americans and the people, that I think that that's what we're saying. Like, even though you treat us this way, and even though we haven't seen justice, we still matter. And there's been a growth of people that are saying, well, we're going to make sure that we show you that it matters. So I definitely think it relates to today, because there's still a lot of stuff going on, but it doesn't make us, that doesn't define who we are. How we react to it defines who we are.
When we talk about, what Jalen's talking about, Black Lives Matter, we talk about when Trayvon Martin was wearing a hood, right? And that still is something that happens today. And now we have masks on top of it. And I've heard many Black people talk about the desire to not have to wear a mask, not because they don't want to spread COVID, but because they're afraid of having somebody look at them like they may be doing something wrong because they have a mask on. So imagine wearing a hoodie and a mask.
Okay, anybody else, or should we move on? Okay, let's see. Janie Williams, one of our library board members, commented, the profound statement for me is on page 97, when Baldwin said, the price of the liberation of white people is the liberation of the Blacks. The total liberation in cities and towns before the law and in the mind. So I think this is the first step in changing the mindset. And 20 West, the Learning Center from the Norwalk Housing, wrote that building individual relationships based on the character of that person. And let's see. Let's see. A couple of these were to individual panelists, and they've already responded. Sylvia Schulman, to everyone, she said page 86 seems very apropos to today's situation in the US. Sorry, this thing keeps scrolling down. It is rare indeed that people give. Most people guard and keep. It is what they identify with and what they themselves are guarding and keeping. Let's see. Okay. Is everyone still there? Okay.
Yes, we're here.
We're just trying not to talk, because then you'll cut us off, so we're quiet.
I wouldn't cut you off, and you guys will let me know anyway, so I'm not worried about that.
I was going to say something about what you just read, Sherelle. The fact that Sylvia her quote is in the chat. I'm reading about guarding and keeping, and then Sharon right after that talks about what we do to regain our sense of worth. And some people mistakenly perhaps are thinking that guarding and keeping is a way of maintaining and having self-worth. And I think Baldwin's message is more about letting go and giving. And in fact, I'd like to read a quote, if I could, from page 109, but I probably don't have the same copy. Anyway, he talks, I'll just read a few of the lines. Love takes off the masks that we fear we cannot live without, which I think someone mentioned earlier. And love is a state of being in the tough and universal sense of quest and daring and growth. And to me, guarding and keeping is the opposite of growth.
Okay.
Just using his words.
So I want to give a shout out to Lori Goldberg, who is a phenomenal teacher and just a phenomenal human being. And she said there just isn't enough time. And I agree with you. This conversation could just go on and on, but in the sake of time, I'm going to ask the panelists to choose, which question we should end with. So we have the 2020 comparison to the 60s. We have the white and systemic racism. Looking at our youth, how do our children learn about themselves in the context of history, and the last, which I think is very phenomenal, what's our call to action?
So can I ask a question before anybody answers that? Would it be crazy if we just went through the questions, and if anybody needs to leave, they they do, your recording, and we can complete the conversation and just kind of stick to our questions? Or are the panelists tied for time? I know I'm out here on a limb, but if I don't try.
I think say I got time today.
Right. And I think we should probably stick to the script. We can always see if anybody's interested in a part 2, or we can pose this to, and I think we had that discussion before of whether we should just end it. I don't know if panelists want to raise their hand. I mean, not panelists, but the audience wants to raise their hand. I just think in maybe 10 minutes over, but I don't think we should. Hold on, I'm just looking. Somebody wrote part 2.
Yeah.
Somebody's writing, sign me up for another session. So I think what we should do, let's just end when we're supposed to, and let's do a part 2, because then we can work out the kinks that we had starting. So we can do a part 2. So maybe do we want to save the call to action for the part 2?
Yes.
Yes, I think that'll be great.
I agree.
Okay. So I'm gonna let you all choose.
I'm for number 6.
Okay.
I'm for the youth question.
That's 2 for 6.
That's 2 for 6.
I'm for whatever everybody else wants.
You're such a diplomat.
I'll go for 6 too.
All right, 6 it is.
I'm the non-Norwalk resident here, so I gotta fall in where I can.
We know Dr. Estrella wants number 6 because it goes from her question. So yes.
Dr. Estrella, you're good? Number 6? I don't think she's there. Okay, so
I'm good.
You're good? Yay. Okay, we knew you would be. And Karen?
All good.
All good. Farah?
Yes, definitely.
Okie dokes. And I'm sorry, you did agree first. I'm sorry. Okay, so number 6, we cannot look at our future without looking at our youth. How do children of color learn about themselves in the context of history? One of our panelists imagined, and I don't know if you want to, do you want to say which panelist, but she imagined, Dr. Stray, okay, that she was speaking to Mr. Baldwin, and she asked, why did you find it important to personalize history and the issues of Black oppression in the United States in your book? How can young adults utilize these experiences given today's realities? So I'm going to let everyone speak to that, and we'll end on that question.
I'll say something about it just quickly. James Baldwin, at the end of his life, was a teacher, and he cared enormously about young people. He felt every line, on page after page in The Fire Next Time, you see him referring to, life is our responsibility. We have to be responsible to it because of the people who are going to follow us. He cared enormously about the young people. So this was foremost in his mind. And when he was working, when we were collaborating, his project was called Remember This House, and he wanted to do his own remembering of the civil rights movement. Intercut with that, and this pertains, he was going to interview 3 young people whom he had known since infants. They were infants and just literally held them on his lap. He wanted to ask the son of Martin Luther King and the daughter of Malcolm X and the son of Medgar Evers, all 3 of them, a question, and we were going to film him doing these interviews. He wanted to ask them, was it worth it that your father was assassinated? In other words, where are we in terms of progress? What does progress mean? Is there hope? And what shape does it take? And that's why young people have to be spoken to and have to be addressed.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah. So I'm a proud product of K through 12 in Norwalk Public Schools, and also a proud product of Norwalk Community College. So I can really speak to what Norwalk looks like, and I'm not so far removed from that because of my age. So I would say, as a product of Norwalk Public Schools, I didn't see my history reflected. I yearned for my history to be taught. I yearned for Black and Brown history to be taught in my schools. I yearned for teachers that looked like me, that inspired me. And I think I'm so hopeful by this generation, this coming generation of young folks, because they are so eager to learn true history, and they are so inspiring. I see a lot of like down talk for like Gen Z and millennials, but I really see them as the future, really truly caring about our environment, really truly caring about people being represented and fully represented and holistically. So I'm very hopeful for young people, and I think we have to advocate for them to be taught their history. So yeah, that's just my piece on it.
Thank you so much.
And I'm gonna glide right off that because that's
your thing.
one of my missions. So as we teaching the full history, and I don't just mean it to specify history as in history. I mean to teach the history of like inventions and science and mathematics as well, from all the accomplishments of minorities as well. So the idea becomes that they are all inclusive throughout all of the education that we have. So that's exactly to go with what Farah was saying, and that is what I truly believe in, because that is, I think, the only way to truly reach across and have the children to grow up. And I referenced Senator Bob Duff when, you know, he was spit on by the police officers because he voted on the crime bill or the policing bill. And it was like, well, what they're spitting on you because they don't want you to be for the policing bill because that helps Black people. So it made this really odd connection in my head of what were they doing? And they must not have ever been taught like this more inclusive education of, you know, acceptance of all these different races and people. So then I'm gonna relate it back to James Baldwin's book here.
I just want to jump in and say that we have to say alleged. It wasn't spit on, it was spit alleged. At. So we just want to be careful.
Correct, you're absolutely correct, allegedly. So
and it's not to say, you know, anyone's lying, but I just want to keep the library neutral.
No, I totally understand.
Okay.
I misspoke.
No, not at all. Not at all, sweetie. You have to do you. I have to do my part. But you go ahead. You be Elijah, but I just had to do my part.
No problem. So I'm going to just relate it back to James Baldwin. And on page 104, he says it like this. For the sake of one's children, in order to minimize the bill that they must pay, one must be careful not to take refuge in any delusion, and the value placed on the color of the skin is always and everywhere and forever a delusion. And that right there needs to bridge that gap of everything that I have been talking about with teaching and with the ability to see color, and just not to see it as anything other than an opportunity to learn, to accept, and to grow. And that for me, I teach my children that all the time. Like, have that conversation with somebody, because it will allow you to become a better person, and it will allow them to become a better person, and you will empathize and feel and understand.
Wonderful. And I know they can't go wrong with having a dad like you. So
thank you.
I don't know if anyone else has, I know Dominique Johnson, one of our council members, has a comment. And she wrote, I've always been moved by Baldwin's notion of freedom, especially in the quote on page 86, which I see as part of his foundation on a call to service and acts of love. The quote is, one can give nothing whatever without giving oneself. That is to say, risking oneself. If one cannot risk oneself, then one is simply incapable of giving. And Nancy Meany, who is the vice chair of the Open Door Shelter, she said, very beautifully said, Elijah. And so I just want to thank everyone for joining. And we had some really, really dynamic conversations, and we probably should have known we couldn't get all of this in an hour and a half. So we hope that you will join us in a part 2. And it looks like, you know, many of you are interested in doing that. Brenda Pin Williams just texted me. Brenda is the head of the NAACP, and she would like to give closing remarks.
Hey, before you do, is it okay? I want to say one thing. As a state representative serving Hartford and Windsor, I have to publicly say this has been amazing to be or to have been invited to your community, to have this very weighty conversation on race and the importance of love. And I want to publicly thank State Representative Travis Sims, who I guess made the recommendation and thought it would be cool for me to participate. So I just want to just thank you all for inviting me into your space and learning from you all. We're going to adopt this, and I'm going to bring this to Hartford because these types of conversations we should be having. So thanks again.
You're very welcome. And I just want to say it was, there were a lot of other people behind the scenes, a lot of people who you'll see in the chat room. It wasn't done in a box. I believe in, being a person of color, whatever is inflicted doesn't mean we have to inflict back. And I've always been about, embracing community. So if we're doing, an African-American one, maybe next we do a Latino, next we do Jewish. That way we are all understanding each other. It's not about being in a bubble and, we are judged. So I think these type of conversations, they break barriers. So I want to thank you for coming into our community and, and enlightening us. So there's lots of chats coming in. So it looks like, people are really happy with the conversation, and we will, figure out a date. We'll come up with a date for part 2. And Brenda, are you there?
I am here. So Sherelle, first of all, I want to thank you. I would like to apologize, but I'm not going to apologize. I had things to do with my sorority this evening. We just finished up, and I'm here. I have a lot of commitments, and I'm sorry about that, but I was not here. I'm hearing everyone saying you had a good time here tonight, but I just want to say we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work that we have to do. And, I think about, we all have the same blood. We might have different colors, but we all have the same blood going through our bodies. And if people would just stop looking at folks for who they look at the exterior and look inside, we will all be a better people. We really will. And I think that Norwalk has a lot of work. And I thank them too for bringing in the superintendent they brought in. I think there's going to be a lot of changes in the school system. I sure hope so. And I really thank you. And again, I would like to work with each and every one of us, each and every one of you, to change the trajectory of Norwalk. Let's make Norwalk a place where people will come and see. They will come and they will ask us, well, how did you get along with the Blacks, the whites, and the browns? How are you guys? We want to be the city that everybody looks to, okay? And so I'm sorry again that I missed it. And folks around here knows I really am, in my heart, I am very passionate about justice. I really am. There's no pretense. I am. I want it to be an even playing field for all, and especially education.
Wonderful.
So with that, I say thank you for attending, and I'll make sure that my calendar is clear the next time, so I'll be here. But thank you.
Brenda, thank you so much. And I think Norwalk is on we're on the trajectory for being the first in a lot of things. We have our pod schools with Dr. Estrella. We have, kids that are going to school in the libraries or the Rowayton Community Center and having this discussion. So with that said, I just want to thank everyone again. and we will look for a date to continue this discussion. Thank you, everyone, and good night.